You're listening to On the Margins with me, Dan O'Sullivan.
And me, Eamon Stack-Mulvihill.
In this podcast, we will examine sites of education which are off the beaten track, non-traditional, non-typical, but diverse and exceptional, looking at learners who are often marginalised and ignored. Okay, we're very happy to be joined here today by Ca O'Halloran. She is the unconventional therapist. She's a playwright, an artist, an academic, and a fellow podcaster. So you're very welcome here to the studio here in ULCA. I suppose maybe it might be good if we asked you about your background, maybe where you went to school, what part of the city you're from, and your academic journey.
Yeah, how long have we got? I suppose like my origin story is that like I was born in St Mary's Park, all my family's from the island. I was either lucky or unlucky to have moved out of there when I was approaching first class. And I suppose when you move from St Mary's Park to a more affluent area, you're always kind of seen as, and I'm a middle child as well, so it kind of really reinforced that kind of experience of being, or dynamic of being in no man's land. So you're neither from the island anymore, and you can neither fully integrate into a community like Corbally or a school like Scollida, because I left one school for another. So
when you say origin story, that makes you sound like a supervillain or maybe a superhero.
Maybe I am.
Yeah.
Maybe I am. Maybe that's how I see myself. But I mean, I think our origin story is really, really important in terms of understanding the trajectory of where our career emerges from, and what are the motivational drives that kind of like move us towards things. So we're all trying to reconcile something. Like none of us are here without being moved internally by internal drivers. And my internal driver was always about the stigma that I carried and the shame that I carried about being in a community without having the support, or even shame being named as a thing that could be a concept that would have actually made sense to me then. Seeing also my family's shame and what that did to my family, the experience of being, moving as a family unit into a new community, and the shame that held. And I suppose I understand shame on a very visceral level. It's almost like no matter what you do, no matter how much education you have, no matter how many PhDs you have, it will never go away. It's as if it's written on your forehead. So that was one of the aspects of my origin story that really is, kind of intrinsic in terms of the work that I do, because I work with people who are full of shame. It's running through their veins, and I'm able to really deeply empathize with that. I suppose secondly, my father calls me his A baby, and he is sober 44 years and I'm 43. So I grew up in an environment where recovery was part of the landscape, and understanding, recovery and the A and the 12 steps was part of the literature of the house. My mother's a psychotherapist, and so that was part of the literature of the house too. And that's not to say we didn't have our own traumas to deal with. We did, but I suppose those kind of little islands of kind of escapism, I think, reading was really an escapist kind of strategy for me, because I was a bit of a loner, really helped me survive those things, the traumas that I experienced. And so...
And how many of you were there growing up?
There was 5 girls, yeah, so we were all girls, and all completely different. Like back then, you'd think, we all felt like, we're so different. And now I look at us now and we're like, there's so many similarities. But I suppose how we coped with the things that we experienced as children, we coped in very different ways. Yeah.
And your mother has she's a psychotherapist too, so you're kind of following along in her footsteps.
Yeah.
And when you moved from the island, was that around the 90s?
Was it around the night? No, I'm not. I'm 43, so it was the 80s.
It was the 80s, yeah. So there was a grand scheme around the late 80s.
We bought the house in Corbally, and So originally my parents lived in South Hill. My mother hated it. Her family was in the island. They had come back from London. They moved to South Hill and she was crying every day. She'd walk from South Hill down to the island to her mother, and then my father actually in a pub, drunk, swapped keys with a man who wanted to move to South Hill, and they literally swapped houses in the pub like that with an exchange of keys, put all of our belongings on a horse and cart and moved them down the island. So that's how that happened. But
that's a story. That's a podcast in itself.
I mean, there's multiple ones in the history of my father's life, believe me. But but that predates my existence. Thank God. Things calmed down when I came along, and my mother being a psychotherapist, she started training like when I was a teenager. So I mean, it was pursued later in my life, but was always interested in parenting, attachment parenting, and that was always how she parented.
Mm-hmm. So would it be fair to say she was almost kind of waiting until you weren't small kids anymore so she could resume her education? Or
I think maybe subconsciously that was part of it. I think the separation then from her, my father allowed her to kind of say, I'm autonomous, I have agency, what is it that I want to do for myself, and now that I'm separate from being someone's partner and my children are grown up. And I just remember being enthralled by the process of her learning, and like the books that she would bring home and the concepts we'd explore together, and I was her little kind of study buddy at the time, and I loved it all.
Are you still in Scollida at this point?
No, I was in St Mary's Secondary School at that point. Yeah,
a most excellent school there in Carberley. Is that also called Art School Vira?
It is, yeah.
It is, yeah. So we both went to Art School.
Commoners call it St Mary's, yeah.
So we both went to Art School in a roundabout way, yeah. So you're in secondary school now. Mammy's gone back to college.
Mm-hmm. Part-time, but back to college, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a bit of see it to be it there, and you did follow along in her footsteps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hated school. I'll put that there on the table as well. Like, although I loved reading, and although I was really musical and artistic, like highly artistic and gifted in so many ways, I look back now and think, wow, I didn't even realise, how special these gifts that we all shared in my family were. But yet I'd go into a school that was ruled by nuns and told that I was stupid and told that I was average at best. I remember sneaking in to check my results in primary school, and I didn't know that I really believe I have a touch of dyslexia when it comes to kind of numbers and dates and things. They just don't retain in my brain. I understand like the method and the equation, but I will never get the number right, the figure right. But I remember breaking into the classroom, like breaking in at lunchtime and going through the teacher's notes to find my results, because I was saying, this time I'm going to be excellent, this time. And it was average was written next to it. And that will be ingrained in me forever, because I just felt like I could never escape the trap of being average in school. And it was nothing to do with me, because I was never average. I can see now I'm not an average human being. I've learned to like really own that now. But back then I just wish the school system or the education system, or even if it wasn't a fucking system at all, and it was just like, some kind of like framework where we were able to play and learn and explore and invent and experiment and discover ourselves, facilitated me knowing that earlier. I really wish that was available to me, because it's such a shame that because it added another layer of shame to what I was already experiencing. And I think that's why I do what I do now, is because I really understand if you were already entering into a place, an institution that we're all compelled to go to, and you have teachers who are that rigid, that see things in black and white in a binary way, where you're either good or bad, or maybe average is the middle, and you already feel ashamed, you already feel, you're not good enough, then like that is not a suitable place at all for a child.
So I'm going to say I'm picking up on shame here, but obviously shame is deeply rooted in your work now as a psychotherapist. So there's a lot of shame built up inside you. Is this kind of shame rooted in social class, family background? Is this what we're talking about? Or
no, I would say it's, first of all, I have free of shame, thank God. So I mean, I have a relationship now with shame that isn't necessarily one that is driving me, but I can relate to it as an external kind of phenomenon that exists in the world. I understand it as an entity, and I understand it as how it infects the minds and souls of other people. And I suppose my work as a therapist is very different than traditional therapists, where I don't sit in a kind of a rocking chair with pearls and see clients by the hour. I always knew from my training, that I would be using this in community-based way, and I wouldn't be necessarily, running a private practice where I would earn a living from my privileged skill set, because everybody needs access to therapeutic intervention. So Limerick City Build, which is a project that I started with my father around 12, 13 years ago, emerged from, all of this kind of thinking where, we would see young men on the margins, excuse the pun, and they were really, kind of persecuted by society and feared and judged, and seen that choice is just something that is very, it's very conscious. That choice is a conscious thing, and it's a moral thing. And I knew somewhere in me that it was connected to trauma, and I suppose my father's piece in that was employment is the way out of that, and I was like, but there's a piece before that, where we need to kind of repair the damage that's done to people's souls so that they're able to kind of say, I'm free now from, the kind of black shawl of shame or trauma or all of the labels that I identified with as a child and mistook myself for.
if you take these, cycle of shame and the trauma that can be deeply rooted, not particularly in you, but if that works for you as well. But a lot of the time, if you've this deeply rooted shame, I'm guessing now because you're the expert, if you've this deeply rooted shame, it can influence your behaviour, might cause you to drink, might cause you to take drugs, and then that can have a series of knock-on effects that can lead you to, interactions with the Gardaí, being seen negatively within the community, he's a tearaway, he's a lunatic, don't associate with him, everything, or her. Is that kind of something you built Limerick City Build to do, is to kind of reach out to people kind of?
Yeah, I suppose for me, you can't talk about trauma, which is my obsession, research obsession, without talking about shame, because that's the kind of shadow of trauma. If trauma was to cast a shadow, it would be shame. And what shame does is create a cycle that perpetuates itself, right? So you experience shame, which is this really bad feeling inside that you can't escape. I feel almost, allergic to my own
A lack of self-worth?
It's even more than that. It's almost like there is no self. It's like I can't exist in this body. There needs to be more than this if I'm to survive this life. This isn't going to get me through to the end of my life. If this is it, I need more. So what shame does is move us towards some other substance, action, behavior that's compensatory. And that very thing that we do, which will have a negative impact on us typically, because it's substitution. So by its nature, it's going to have a negative impact on us, will create more shame. So then we feel, if we wake up from a hangover or after using drugs or having loads of sex with strangers or whatever way this manifests, it's going to create more shame. And then that shame, we'll sit with it for a few days and it gets bigger and it ruminates and it tells you things, and your mind feels like it's separate than yourself, and it takes on a life force of its own, and it moves you towards action again. And that's how the cycle of shame continues and moves you into addiction. And I suppose that's what we're trying to interrupt by creating alternative ways to cope with these feelings that are absolutely normal if you've experienced the childhood experiences that some of the guys that we deal with have.
Okay, that's probably the best explanation of motivational, kind of destructive motivational drives I've ever heard. So thanks. That's all quite heavy. I'm feeling upset just sitting here after hearing that.
Yeah, it's tough stuff. It really is.
But you didn't just confront these emotions within yourself. You did something about it in a community setting. And I suppose there's something, a lot of the time, if you're in a bad space, there's a lot to be said for doing something altruistic, in that it gives you a sense of self-worth and everything that goes with that.
We're trying to heal, we're trying to reconcile and heal the piece we never got to do as kids, is what I fully believe. Like, I look at my colleagues, I look at the people who work in the sector that I do, and I look across at other therapists who are really, the most gifted therapists are the ones who have lived the most traumatic experiences and come through it. It's because, like, Jung used to talk about, like, in your shadow is the golden lining, which is essentially like, the things that we don't dare look at, those parts of us, oh God, I just want to forget about them so much, they were horrendous. But if we go there and if we really mine those experiences and try to, like, really kind of excavate and, exercise, what's left is absolute wisdom.
So you're talking about Carl Jung there. And so for some of our listeners won't know, Carl Jung was a very famous psychologist, and he was a friend of Sigmund Freud, or a contemporary at least.
Yes, to a point. Then they separated under contentious terms. That's an important...
Yeah. I haven't half the knowledge, but this idea of confronting your shadow self within a community setting.
Yes.
So, Limerick City Build, on the surface, it's an outreach program that's giving building skills to mainly young men, but probably some young women. Yeah.
So I would say it's a gender specific.
Okay, so it's men.
Trauma informed.
Yeah.
Training facility. And the word training is quite broad in that not only do we look at transferable skills, i.e. building construction is where we kind of focus primarily and try to excel at, but also we do loads of really robust psychoeducational kind of work with individuals. And because the reason it's gender specific is because, like, men's processing of trauma and their experiences of trauma, like men's trauma is very, very different statistically than women's. Now it's facilitated by a woman, so I say that with, the awareness that it's not fully gender specific. If it was, it would be facilitated by a man. But I think keeping the group primarily male or fully male allows a level of trust, and many of them are coming out of incarceration. Many of them are kind of, facing the potential of incarceration, or might have charges, or on the trajectory, or, might have kind of just lived really destructive lives and want to interrupt that process. And I think, that group work it's almost like, A for, trauma, essentially. And we talk about, like, how trauma can affect your decision making, like why it's hard for you to pay attention in school, or why it was hard for you to pay attention in school because this happened to you. So your memory does not work the same way as a child who had a healthy attachment. Like, those two brains are not the same, and, like, let's look at them. Let's look at the areas of the brain that are actually affected by that.
And this is something, I suppose, that's kind of one of the motivating parts of why we do this podcast, because you asked me at the start how we ended up doing it. There's a whole lot more to education of being a teacher than just kind of writing a lesson plan and, you know, delivering it. I suppose having that holistic understanding of what's going on within, you know, a child's mind. Or so we used to say you could put people into special class, but now we've moved away from that idea and we're on universal design for learning and all that. And there's, you know, this restorative practice is starting in schools and things like narrative 4 and empathy building. And I suppose a lot of people, they like to dismiss these things as kind of wishy-washy and touchy-feely. And I think that's because there's a slight unwillingness to go into this emotional place.
Yeah. Like, look, we have championed ultra-professionalism for like years.
Ever really?
The more professional you are, you know, then you're going to get the promotion, because like this guy has been exemplary and, you know, demonstrated professionalism for his last 10 years in his
wears
career.
A nice suit and
he wears a beautiful suit and he has great
shoes are always
manners,
shined.
you know.
He or she, you know.
He or she, well,
It's probably a man.
I'm fucked. But like, because I've rebelled against that my whole life. But I think, like, you know, what happened to authenticity and all of that? It died because of the school system. That's where it died. And you know, our education system, and then, you know, into the workforce, especially if it's kind of corporate in any way, it just echoes that. So yeah, we have introduced, you know, some kind of positive aspects to learning and positive methodologies, which are always on the fringes of, you know, the mainstream body of what we do. But like, children are still, like, you know, kept on a chair for the majority of the day, and they're told by some figure of authority what's right and what's wrong, and not to question that. And that goes against the very nature of what stage of development that child is at, because children are born to teach us. They're meant to be our teachers. And
that, I mean, I when I started teaching, I thought to myself, they learn more from, after a while, I thought they learn more from each other than they'll ever learn from me. But now I kind of think I'm learning more from my students. We did a conference last year, and we were looking, we called it transformative narratives. And, you know, we looked at a lot of empathy building kind of stuff. I suppose what rings true for me anyway, what resonated with me coming out of it, was the more you understand your students and the more you understand where they're coming from or what has happened to them, particularly in terms of trauma or whatever else, the better you're able to deal with them. Particularly if, you know, you have someone who's acting out a lot, or when you understand the context of maybe what's going on at home, you're a lot less likely to react in a negative way that just reinforces the shame and stigma and further isolates the child. Whereas if you have a more trauma-informed approach, no, I'm throwing around that word there, trauma-informed. Yeah. But you're the expert on that, and I know very little, and I haven't done any training in it as of yet, but it's on my list of things to do.
I'm starting a course in September for professionals if you'd like to join.
Yeah, we might talk about that afterwards.
But I suppose there's a big difference between being trauma-informed and being
permissive,
exposed to narratives that make you compassionate, right? So yeah, it's beautiful to expand your awareness of context, because naturally as human beings we become really compassionate. Oh wow, you lived through that experience, or you know, then I really feel that in my heart, and of course I'm going to respond differently to you and have a little bit more patience. Trauma-informed is different. It's understanding what part of the system, the body and the brain is at work at any one time, and where they are in terms of their processing of trauma that's inhibiting them from learning. So it's combining passion with a kind of skill and a technique, and I think that's really, really important, and oftentimes missed, because people can think that being trauma-informed is just about sympathy. Oh, we just have sympathy for the kids because we know that, you know, they mightn't have the best conditions at home. Whereas what we're missing is an understanding of how those children are actually have been affected on a neurological level, somatic level, psychological level, spiritual level, what that does to their own identity, to their self-identity. Is there a self at all? Is their ego healthy? You know, and what happens if the ego doesn't develop in a healthy way? What scaffolds a person up? And I think there's so much to learn, and it's missing from so much of the teacher training, courses. And I think it should be core and fundamental.
I think you're right in that, and I think there is an unwillingness to engage in it, and it's dismissed as wishy-washy and soft, but it's actually much harder, and you have to be very brave to kind of engage in that space, even if you're on, because you have to confront yourself a little bit as well.
Yeah, I say to my students, this is the second year I'll be running this course for people who work in education, community sector, because there is a deficit of skills. So it's a really robust course. It's 30 weeks. And what I say is you cannot ever become trauma informed unless you are familiar with your own trauma. Mm-hmm. And I often use the analogy of, it's like doing a walkabout with, when people come of age in the Aboriginal tribes, they do, the walkabout. And unless you know that terrain inside out, upside down, in every season possible, and every condition, even if you lose your shoes and, everything goes wrong, that you're able to bring that child and navigate them through that. And it's the same with your own trauma. Unless you cannot do with another person or bring them as further than where you've gone yourself. That's what I always say. And
there's certainly a huge emphasis on leadership there as well. You can't expect people to follow where you won't lead.
Well, if we're going to go out as educators, mentors, facilitators, or even inspire people, the very fact that we have healed our own trauma makes us charismatic, mm-hmm. because we're no longer hiding aspects of ourselves, even if we're not aware of it ourselves. We're fully authentic, and people can feel it from us. Yeah. It's like there's something about that person that makes me feel like I can be really authentic too around them. And it's like, it might not even be like, oh, I'm going to teach you something because I know something you don't know. It could be just my presence alone is so present.
I love what you're saying there. And a lot of what I'm picking up from it is, I say to my students who are going to be teachers, I say, the cross teacher look and presence and all this. And we talk about Carl Rogers, and I tell them the story of my first day walking into a classroom in Youth Reach. The last job I had, I was in Domino's Pizza. I had no teacher training, and I walked in with a black attaché case because I thought it made me look professional. I'm wearing a sports jacket that my ma bought me with Elmo pads that, I normally wore for getting into a nightclub, because I thought that's how a teacher should look. And I was completely going in with this kind of contrived idea of what a teacher was, rather than
syndrome all over the place.
Rather than being my authentic self. Yeah. And it takes a long time, it can take a while before a trainee teacher or even a teacher who's qualified can go into a classroom and behave as their authentic self, rather than some kind of contrived notion of who a teacher or what a teacher should be. Mm. When you're talking about confronting the shadow self and this idea, and having done it yourself, you gain something, you have the charisma, you have to practice what you preach. Mm-hmm. You can't be saying to other people, you have to do this to develop, unless you've done it yourself.
Being aligned and genuine,
Can I ask you, you probably have to get asked about this metaphor a lot. I was actually Googling it under the table there a second ago, so I wasn't, I was still listening to you.
Trick questions.
Yeah, I had to Google this. It's one's definitely going to catch you out. Have you heard of this idea of, I hope I pronounced this right now, kintsugi? The Japanese thing where if you break like a cup or something, you repair it with gold.
I have heard of that, yeah.
Yeah, so it's to borrow from
And it becomes more precious in that
yes,
culture, yeah.
yes, or to borrow a line from Leonard Cohen, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Is that something you'd feel very much working with the the men
even
in
in my life, it's the people who own their shadow or their flaws or the parts that are damaged in themselves that I'm most attracted to, and that isn't even a conscious thing. I just think they're fascinating people. I think the most fascinating people are the people that have overcome adversity to me, because to sustain that level of life transformation means like there must be some real gems of wisdom within that person, and they're the people that I'm generally like really drawn to, and also that's what I want to cultivate within the clients and the learners that we have in Limerick City Build, because it's in all of us, with the right conditions. No matter what you've gone through in your life, no matter what hell that you've lived through, there is nothing, not one single thing. I mean, and I have heard horror stories in my tenure in Limerick City Build, but there is nothing that relationships, can't repair.
I think as well there's a tendency from people, because of, ingrained shame and guilt, to kind of write themselves off and to dismiss themselves and to have really negative beliefs about themselves. But again, going back to the Kitsingu, if I'm definitely not pronouncing that right, or, never write yourself off. Yep. You can always be better tomorrow. That's, it's never too late. That's what they invented death for.
Lovely when you're on the other side to say those things because they make sense. But when someone is entering into your, engaging with you initially and they genuinely feel like, they're the lowest piece of SH that exists.
You've said fuck twice now, so you can say shit if you want.
Lowest piece of shit, and that they have no value, really. Like, you can see it in them, but there is something in them. And this is what I find so compelling. And I and this is what keeps my own spirituality alive, is that even if someone has come out of a life sentence and comes in, their only desire is to do good in the world. Like, where does that come from? What they've endured, what they've gone through, is the equivalent of hell really on earth, because 20 years means you've gone through prisons back then were, very unpleasant places where things happen that we won't even get into here. But, and also if you've experienced physical or relational trauma early on in, the very first few years of your life, to overcome that and even get in the front door of a place like Limerick City Build, and I'm sure there's other places too, means that there's something alive in your spirit, because it's not in your psychology. Like, research tells us there's nowhere that could hold that level of hope relationally, but there is something that drives them in there, because there is a place in us all that wants to just survive, bloom, connect, and it's about connection. And as soon as they feel that genuine connection where there's no judgment, and for some reason, and I don't know why, and that's why I always say my origin story, maybe you'll find it in there, is that I have had never ever struggled with any ability to hold a non-judgmental approach. They could have murdered someone, they could have lived a life of relentless crime for a decade, but once they come out and they say to me, I want to change, that's it. It's from that moment forward that I engage with them.
With that, so in Limerick City Build, the skills, the trade skills or whatever they are, they're almost secondary to the emotional development.
For me, they are.
What does success look like from a graduate of Limerick City Build, or what's a success story from that?
So for funders, success is a very different thing. Yeah, so we're very aware that it's all, KPIs
Builds.
and data and all of that, and who got employed and who didn't. And for me, what success looks like is someone who has found within them a joy that they can sustain themselves. When I hear lads laughing on the floor, like, that really, really lights my heart up. When I see them smiling, because when I see them engaging in group, which takes about 3 months before that really happens.
Yeah.
Some people cannot sit in a chair in front of me when they first come in. It's so confronting for them.
Yep.
That level of intimacy is just too much for them. And when I see them be able to relax and regulate themselves and just and see their that, sympathetic nervous system just take on a completely different way of working within their body, then I know that what we're doing here feels safe. And for me, that's success. Success is that I have an idea. I'm able to explore and be creative and make mistakes and experiment, and I'm not going to call myself stupid or say this is stupid or throw things on the ground. Or I have different skills now. I'm going to ask for help. If they engage with instructors who are male without being afraid of the authority that they hold, that's success for me. And that might mean that at the very end, forget about the piece of paper, that they're better dads, they're better partners, they're better friends, but they're better at being alone with themselves. That's success for me. Because, I often say to my friends, if the ultimate success that no one wants to talk about is that they don't want to kill themselves anymore.
Yep.
And that's something none of us want to talk about. But it's something that is alive in all of us. I think it was Carl Jung as well that said that, unless you have contemplated your own suicide, then you haven't really reached the peak of your own aliveness. Because I think those two things happen almost,
Yeah, I think a lot of people deal with trauma in different ways, but I look at guys jumping off cliffs and not parachute jumping, what's the one, wingsuit flying,
Wingsuits, yeah.
and a huge proportion of these people are dealing with PTSD. And so I suppose in that they're getting their sense of
extreme sports.
So they're kind of dealing with the trauma by confronting their
contemplating the doom.
Getting close to doom. You mentioned creativity, and we've gone really deep there. So if for our listeners,
lighten it up.
Let's lighten it up a little bit.
I have a tendency to go to.
Well, no, we were brave. We went into the emotional space, but we'll take a breath for a second. I want to ask you about your creative work as a playwright.
So, I made my first film last year, and I made it with my friend and colleague and gifted artist Grace Dias. So we co-wrote it, co-directed it.
Sorry, Grace
Dias. So she is a pretty well-known filmmaker, and she would be a playwright. I'm not necessarily a playwright. And so, but we wrote this together, and essentially, the process we took was, to really allow the story to tell itself, because I'm really into process-oriented work. And Arnold Mandel, I don't know if you've ever heard of him. Be really good for your class if you did.
I have small bits of psychology. Art, I'm useless.
Blow your no, this guy is just all around how to get the best out of group work.
Okay, what's his name again?
Arnold Mandel. I think as a teacher, it would be you'd be really into him. But so and then in terms of the set design and the casting, it was all our own team, our own graduates. So we built the sets, we dressed the sets, and all of the team of Limerick City Build, or whether they were graduates of Limerick City Build, were all cast. We had some professional actors for some of the specialer roles.
Come to think of it, we may have a mutual friend. Had you Graham Gill as an actor?
Graham Gill.
He was in Vikings, big beard.
Yes, I think
Yeah.
that's possible.
Yeah.
I'm
Anyway,
so bad
if you're
at
listening,
this.
hello,
My
Graham.
dyslexia again. Please don't take it personal if you were in the film. But yeah, so that was an amazing process and made me fall in love with the art of filmmaking, because I suppose, you know, my history is more in fine art, and this was a way of kind of combining my love of dialogue and talking about things that I am passionate about, my love of psychology and understanding the inner workings of people and motivations of people, and then I suppose how you translate that visually onto a screen. And it was just like an amazing process.
So you've made your first film, which is, it's a big statement.
Yeah,
And the name of the film was The No Show, am I right?
the no-show, yeah.
Was it on in the Jetland?
So
I have been Googling it. I haven't been able to find it.
So if I had known you then, I would have invited you. We sold out the View Cinema for the premiere. Yeah, so we got the biggest
Opening night or
room there,
Yeah,
I think it was 350 seats. So we sold that. It was an amazing audience. But what made it more amazing was we did like a Q&A afterwards. We were able to really talk about, like, you know, why we made those creative decisions that we did, you know, even though they might look kind of bizarre, that, like, you know, or even thoughtless, that they were really deeply rooted in the sense making of a trauma-informed film. And we wanted to combine, like, the trauma-informed principles with contemporary art, and they seem to, like, you know, really, like, be a smooth integration. And we worked with Shane Serrano then and his team to shoot it. So
yes,
we had a couple of screenings and they were really successful, and we hope to have some more, and I hope to make some more films. I'm going to make another one this year with the group that we have. So
what's The No Show all about?
So the No Show is about young men who, like, you know, don't turn up. So I remember Grace came to me and she was like, you know, I have a title in my head. And I was like, oh, a title in your head means, like, you know, you already
Have a structure.
have an idea. I'm like, oh.
yeah.
But she came out with the term no-show, and I was like, whoa, yeah, that's what we call people. The lads
it's a no-show.
if you don't turn up for us, you know, on a site, he's a fucking no-show.
Yeah.
And I was like, this fits really, really well. And she didn't know that that was a Limerick term, right?
Yeah.
So it was kind of like synergetic
Yeah.
the way it happened. And I suppose it's about understanding what could be going on for someone who, through a trauma lens, who cannot show up. You know, when I'm talking about guys who can't sit in the chair in front of you, who literally can't turn up because life is just, it's too hard for them to get out of their room. Like, they need a joint before they need their breakfast. You know, they need something to regulate themselves before they even make a phone call. And so we really delved into the kind of psychology behind the no-show, so that people would really understand, when you're at the other end of that as a professional, what could be, and it's always a could in the work of trauma. It's always a could. You're always curious. That's all you need to be, is just to retain curiosity. I wonder what is going on. That's all you need to do. And it's just, if we could just hold on to that, if the audience could hold on to that as a result of the film, then, you know, that was a winner for us. And it delved back into multiple generations where, like, you know, it was a story about men and their ways of not showing up. So, like, you know, dads cannot show up by, you know, sitting in a chair and just ignoring you. Like, you know, how many people can relate to that story? And then there was one scene, and you know, this was a really powerful scene, and it was a scene where there was a father who was in a chair and his kid was calling him and he wasn't responding at all, and the camera panned out and there was, like, the bishop who had abused him in the back corner of the room, and it was just a symbol for the fact that he's in every room.
Yeah.
And that's why it's not safe for that dad to feel like he could be
Connecting with the
fluid
child.
and connect and be free and authentic and feel safe as a person, because that's what happens. You know what I mean? So the story was really dark. Some people criticized it for how dark it was, but what I didn't want to do was sugarcoat it or make a Netflix style fucking version of it, because this is the reality of what we work with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, or ignore the darkness, because you're challenging people to confront the darkness, and that's the whole point of it.
This is the reality. We've ignored it for long enough.
And what's happening for the father is he's having I'm going to say the 1,000-yard stare.
Yes.
So
the father's
he's physically present. Yeah.
So he has to disconnect from the experience of what happened, and by default, he disconnects from the child. And so the child then will grow up with a sense of, because children only become what they have been witnessed to be. And so if I am someone who isn't worth seeing, then he'll grow up to disconnect his own child. And that's how intergenerational trauma patterns, in terms of nature, forget about epigenetics, we won't go down that avenue. In terms of nature, repeat themselves, and we went all the way back to the famine. So it's a really, really interesting story.
Where can we see this film if we want to see it?
Yeah, so we're going to have another few screenings, because there's so many people that have come to me who I didn't know at the time, but have heard about it and are really interested in it. So I'm going to arrange another Limerick screening for sure, and myself and Grace she's in the middle of filming something else, but as soon as we get some breath, we'll definitely do another kind of run.
We should say as well,
screenings.
the trailer is available on Instagram for the Limerick City Build, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So there's a trailer on the Unconventional Therapist web or Instagram, and then we made, it's not a very active Instagram, but we made an Instagram account just for the promotion of the film, The No Show, so you can see it on that as well. You can see some of the artwork that we do on Draw Out Limerick, which is on Instagram also. Yeah.
But we can't let you go without asking you about the course in September.
Yes. So
how do we sign up?
So you literally just you can email admin@Limerick City Build, and we'll send the info pack out. You can follow me on LinkedIn, and we've promoted it there as well. And
can I ask who it's aimed at?
So it's aimed at frontline workers, teachers, people who are dealing with trauma, who might not even recognise that they are, or people who are dealing with challenging behaviour, and they can't seem, no matter how good they are, or how many, the skills that they have, or how much training they have, they just can't seem to kind of get through to some students, or really understand the world that they're coming from, because it's not, there's this thing I think that exists in Limerick. It's like, unless you're from a disadvantaged area, you're not really respected in your industry, which I think is a load of bullshit, because I think it's just about your capacity to relate. It's all about relationships at the core of everything. So I was listening to people say they were trauma informed, and I was like, oh really, where did you study? This is 3 years into doing a PhD in the subject, and
we haven't even got to that yet. Yeah.
Well, I've done a 2-day workshop online, and I'm like, holy sweet Jesus, there is a hijacking of this language that's going on that is really distressing, and it's dangerous, because what it does is it gives people a false sense of
capability.
Yes, and they're going to start. So
we'll open the laces on the shoe, or it's probably on the Pandora's box where your trauma is, and then when it comes out, I've done a 2-day training.
I won't know what to do with it. I'll run a mile, and I leave you then feeling everything your defenses, which are the most sophisticated. We should be bowing down to them, not trying to take them off someone, bowing down to them, no matter what they are, even if they're substances. Unless you know how to deal with the trauma that's coming out, stay away. So first of all, I teach people how to work around it. If your profession doesn't avail you of the skill set to work with it, there's ways to work around it, which I think most people should be actually teaching. And then the other piece is that it's 30 weeks long. And I know that's kind of like, what? I have to go back to college? And it's because we have to start like in the beginning, and that's like the pre and perinatal stage of development. So it's like in utero, that's where we start, and we go through all of the potential ruptures and traumas that people can experience and how that will affect you as a person, your identity, your behavior, and how it will manifest then later in life. And then later we look at the kind of interventions that we can have as, workers that will actually be effective. So I suppose last year was a real success. Everyone unanimously said their work has dramatically changed because of it. And it's such a passion of mine. I love teaching it. And so if it's on just one morning a week or one evening a week, you get to choose. So I'm running it twice. There's such an interest in it. So, and it's free. So if there's anyone out there that would like to sign up for it, just hit me up.
Okay. And then finally, because we're kind of over time,
Stop talking.
the work you're doing is very, very important. Could be an armchair psychologist, not that there's anything wrong with it. You're very much out in the community, which means you're probably not making as much as some of your contemporaries. So you're in the artistic sense, you're suffering for your work. On that note, if there is a big company down there in Plassey Technological Park down the road there, or, out the road there in Raheen or wherever they are, or there's someone listening who has some sort of a philanthropic bone or coins available that they wanted to pass on to you, they can get in touch. Can you give us the email?
Yeah, so they can get in touch by emailing info@limerickcitybuild.ie. And I suppose we started this project, me and my father, with nothing, only a unit on licence from the council, where we would pay a nominal fee of, I think it was €1 or something a year, just to facilitate this project. And I'm so grateful to them at the time for giving it to us. That's not the case now, believe me. We're paying astronomical rental fees, and I think we've probably put all of my children's life savings into it, as well as all of his grandchildren's life savings, because we've never really been part of the mainstream to access funding. We've always gone to get it. We were anti-establishment when we started. That's why we started. It was like a rejection of everything that was there, and I think that really kind of put us at a disadvantage in terms of getting that kind of core funding that you would need. So if there is anyone out there that feels like this work is worthwhile, I truly believe that if this work was to be multiplied and we have the facility to do so, that this could transform the landscape of Limerick, not just for men, for women too, if we had the resources.
Especially for anyone in the local council there who's listening and feels the city is slipping back into the place it was in the early noughties, get on to Ka. Ka, thank you so much for coming in and talking to us today and being brave, encouraging all of us to kind of confront our shadow selves a little bit. Thanks very much for coming in today, and the very best of luck in all that you're doing.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of On the Margins.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please follow and subscribe on all your usual platforms or wherever you get your podcasts.
You can also check us out on our website, aidonthemargins.com, for more info, content and upcoming events. See you soon.